Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Hubbard, and I'm currently an elementary principal at a school in Indiana. I became acquainted with Dr. Ruby Payne and her work approximately 20 years ago, and I was so impacted by her work and all of her research that I have based my entire practice around it. It is an honor for me to speak to you today about my findings. I first went through the Framework for Understanding Poverty workshop training, and then a few years later went to the Bridges training, and most recently I attended emotional poverty training. After the initial training in each of these workshops that accompanied the book, then I went on to become a trainer for each area. I have trained for 3 different school corporations in Indiana because they sent me so that I could come back and present to the entire district. And so I have presented Dr. Payne's work to administrators, teachers, support staff, and even to bus drivers. I have had the pleasure of being a teacher, a school counselor, and an administrator at various levels and in various socioeconomic situations. And of course, with many, many wonderful people as my coworkers. Currently, I am an elementary principal in a rural, small town school of about 350 students. We are a Title I school with an 80% free and reduced lunch population. The first district that sent me to training was going through an economic transition. And after reading the very first page of Dr. Payne's original frameworks book, I was hooked. The information has defined my career because I believe in it with a passion. The stories, the information, the research, and the case studies have helped to make sense of an extremely difficult, overwhelming, abstract concept of poverty and helped me make it a manageable and help me to make manageable and workable concrete plans to help struggling children and the teachers that serve them. Because of following her work so closely, I felt compelled to work within a more impoverished community than where I was. I wanted to live what I was reading about, and I wanted to walk the talk in an authentic situation. Many days I am still overwhelmed because poverty is painful. But what I have learned from being here and from implementing Dr. Payne's work will continue to impact me for the rest of my life. I was fortunate to be given the opportunity to come to one of the most impoverished counties in the state of Indiana to become a practicing principal in my most recent experience. The generational poverty is high. The situational poverty is high. There is a painfully high drug problem here and many mental illness issues. Many of the issues for these folks are intertwined. For example, in the 4 years I have been here, 5 students have lost parents due to overdoses. And in a typical classroom now at my school, up to half of the students have one parent incarcerated. It is my opinion that rural areas are often underserviced because it is difficult to get quality resources to them. For many families here, the hope is gone and they have become desperate. The poverty mentality is rampant, with no foreseeable future in sight. This county where I am living was once a thriving manufacturing community, and social capital was actually transplanted from Appalachia when the plants were first established back in the 1940s. Families from generational poverty came to live here, and many have stayed for generations. Then, the manufacturing was moved to Mexico, and many families were sent into situational poverty and depression. I was attracted to this situation because, as I stated earlier, I wanted to employ the strategies that I had been learning about through Dr. Payne's work, and I wanted to make a difference in this community. Once settled here, because I had to relocate, my staff willingly and eagerly began to review and study intensely the frameworks for understanding poverty concepts in depth. We immediately used professional development time to study the resources offered in the community. But then simultaneously, we began to unwrap the resources of each of our students so we could know what would work to help our students break the cycle. We learned that poverty isn't just about the lack of money, but rather the lack of multiple resources. We talked about what resources were strong for each of our students and how we could supplement the ones that weren't strong. We talked about dysfunctional families and how a student's needs cannot be met if a parent is using all of the resources. We found great understandings and mindset changes as we worked through Dr. Payne's material. We studied the powers of register, the power of registers of language, and how the adult voice is critical when working with children. And we also learned how quickly a situation can turn when the adults are using the whining child voice. Another entire professional development session covered the influences of economic class and the hidden rules to understand each class. We read and discussed Dr. Payne's scenarios, and then we researched and brainstormed some case studies of our own from within our own community. We came up with alternatives and developed plans to supplement the resources for our neediest students. As a staff, we created a brand new vocabulary for ourselves for dealing with the thought processes and the behaviors of parents and students from poverty. We practiced role-playing for what to say to parents and students in different situations to reframe for a possible mindset shift. We built relationships with high-risk students across grade levels, not just in our own classrooms, but across the school to build connections and relationships with more functional and positive adults. And when I say we built relationships, I mean we have given blood, sweat, and tears into these relationships. It has been mind-blowing for me to see how far people will go to help a child or their family member in this profession. We made it a goal to speak life to our students, which included constantly encouraging and discussing future story and reframing as much of our speech as we could to the positive. We moved our discipline plans to reflect additive models, and we utilize mental models for teaching as often as we are able. Because Dr. Payne has taught us that all these practices are helpful for all children, but especially for children with limited resources and experiences. After implementing all of these strategies, we saw stronger teaching, more effective relationship building with students and parents, and we saw a much more positive culture and climate within our school, which was expressed through social media, parent surveys, and by word of mouth throughout the community. On the flip side, however, as a staff, we still continued to see more individual behavior problems, more students coming to school angrier than ever before, more violent behaviors, larger, bigger populations of students that were identified at risk. So once again, we turned to the research and the experts for answers. As soon as it came out, I read the new book by Dr. Payne called Emotional Poverty, and I attended the first workshop provided by her in Indianapolis in February. Since that time, I have personally attended a Train the Trainers 3-day workshop in Texas and attended the 1-day workshop 3 other times, because every time I hear her speak, I learn something new and gain more valuable insight for helping our students. After returning from the trainings, we immediately began implementing strategies from the new book and planting brain functions ideas to other staff. Dr. Payne's work is once again a framework from which all brain-friendly programs or strategies fit into. So our first step was to identify and memorize exactly what the term emotional poverty means and how it translates into our classrooms. It is not a diagnosis, but rather a combination of realities that prevent our students from succeeding. So I designed a hand mental model so staff could remember and be able to use it for identifying students that need intervention. While we used the hand-brain model referenced in the Emotional Poverty book, this hand model was just for staff to submit the definition and to remind them what to look for in these high-need students, so we would know what strategies to use. This first slide shows a model of a regulated brain. Dr. Payne teaches that emotional poverty is one or more in a combination of 4 realities. An unregulated brain, unintegrated brain, is the first of these realities. A weak inner self is the second. What's underneath the unregulated brain? There are bonding and attachment issues as one of the realities. And finally, something in the person's environment is leading them to believe that they are less than and separate from. Somehow, they just don't belong. So then we began to break down the definition piece by piece. Our staff studied the hand model of the brain as a reference in chapter 1 of the book. and we completely digested what a regulated and an unregulated brain would look like behaviorally. Then we taught the hand model of the brain to our students in kindergarten through 6th grade. This was not optional. We found that the students understood the concepts even as young as kindergarten. And they know that a closed fist with fingers over the thumb is referred to as home base. I recently asked a 1st grade student if he was at home base before he left my office, and he replied, "Well, Mrs. Hover, I can't get to my fingers because my thumb is out." So the point being that he had translated the concept, and I knew that he needed to stay in my office just a little bit longer. Staff members understand that no work can take place with our students until the student and the adult is at home base. The students are also constantly being taught strategies to calm themselves. We continuously coach the students to name their feelings and to make connections between their thoughts, feelings, and actions, so consequences will make more sense and be more meaningful. We remember to validate the feelings of the student and help them reframe their thoughts. Next, we learned about and discussed a weak inner self. We talked about the stages of child development according to Erickson's research, and we assigned an emotional age to each of our students versus their chronological age. We wrote this on paper, and then we brainstormed ideas and strategies for students that didn't match ages. Dr. Payne teaches us that we can't necessarily change the behavior, but we should aim at changing the motivation behind the behavior. If we can motivate students toward good behavior, this will in turn develop a child's inner strength. Next, we dove deep into bonding styles, and each child was also placed into a category for a bonding style. Once again, we brainstormed for ideas of what would work for each type and how we could reach and teach students from every area. We developed a plan for each student that wasn't secure and bonded, and we determined that discipline is not about punishment, but rather about consequences that will influence learning and motivation. We triaged our students according to the needs of the students and for safety purposes. Students with the greatest needs will have plans that surround them with motivation and safety. We have covered the differences between how boys learn and how girls learn, and what we need to be aware of and remember as educators when we're comparing the two. What is the best way to present information to boys? And why are there more discipline referrals from boys? What do we need to be doing about this as the adults under their charge? Once again, we found the answers and where to begin in Dr. Payne's book, Emotional Poverty. Our staff has a very clear understanding about the importance of co-regulation and the emotional dance that occurs in each classroom. We continue to monitor our own emotional triggers. We have developed strategies to address these emotional dances for the first thing in the morning, in the middle of the day, and at the end of the day, right before dismissal. We also utilize various strategies during transitions because there are more opportunities for emotional noise during unstructured times. These practices create less opportunity for less than and separate from realities. The first year we implemented Dr. Payne's strategies from the Frameworks book, our state level school grade went from a D to an A because of student improvement scores on a statewide measurement. We haven't quite replicated that first year's growth, but we are holding steady. The important point is that the only changes made to the practices at our school were the complete adherence to Frameworks tenets. Not only did achievement raise, but discipline referrals dropped. They were literally cut in half for violent behaviors. This year, after implementing emotional poverty strategies and beliefs, suspensions for violent, angry outbursts are much lower than in years past. We are working hard alongside our students to keep them regulated, boosting their inner selves, acknowledging their bonding and attachment styles, and delivering consequences accordingly, and working fiercely to create an environment where no one feels less than and separate from. We are certainly a success story, even though we continue to give 100% every day. Thank you, AHA Process, for your support and guidance for our school.